Welcome to episode 64 of the How to Japanese podcast. I'm Daniel Morales from howtojapanese.com, and it's May 2025. We made it. Otsukaresama deshita. And my God, the weather was amazing in Osaka for a while. Up until a couple days ago, it really did feel like a Chicago summer, which I always think about the 4th of July in Chicago, which usually gets up to around 75 or 80 in the middle of the day. And then crashes into the low 60s at night, and you can kind of bike along the lake, and it's super pleasant. We're having some weather like that in Osaka, and I hope you got some of that, whether you're in Kanto or Kansai, because I think literally in the last couple day or two, it's gotten to be just about summer, I would say, where you feel like you need 2 showers a day. We're kind of starting to turn the air conditioning on because we're weak, and all that nice spring weather is just about gone. But we enjoyed it while we could. Didn't do too much over Golden Week. I went over to Takatsuki, which is a little city between here and Kyoto. I think it's probably part of Osaka, actually, maybe, or at least Osaka, the prefecture. But they have this jazz street event every year during Golden Week, which I can highly recommend. For 2 days, they have performances all over town at little venues, right on the Shotengai, on the top of the department store, and in out on the street in front of the station, and in kind of these small little clubs. And so the performances were a bit hit or miss here and there, but highly recommend checking it out, especially on the top of the department store. It was really nice. They had a lot of seats where you can sit down. Out in front of the stations, it's all kind of standing room only, but definitely give that some consideration if you're ever in the area around that time. I've decided also that I'll probably keep my tourist recommendations to the podcast. The last 2 months on the blog, I wrote about recommendations in Osaka and Kyoto, but I'm going to probably limit those to the podcast from now on, and I'll limit them to the end of the podcast. Probably keep them pretty small too. If I do ever have something nice and kind of blog worthy like the last couple of months, I'll post them, but I'll try to include a little bit of lanyap for podcast listeners. I'm not sure if that's a word y'all are familiar with, but that is a little New Orleans Cajun word, I think, that means a little something extra. When I grew up in New Orleans, it was the name of the extra section of the paper that got included with a Times-Picayune every Friday. And it had like movie reviews and cultural articles and things like that. And it was called lanyap. And so we just kind of grew up with that word. So stay tuned for those lanyap tourist recs at the end of the episode. This month, the topic I'm covering makes me really glad that I have a podcast in addition to a newsletter and a blog, because language is more than just the written language. Some might even argue that they're two separate things entirely. To be honest, I'm not sure if people actually argue this or not, but if you think about it enough, it does make sense. Language is the sounds we make, communication between people, and the written language is an expedient we use to capture that communication on paper. So limiting How to Japanese to the blog, to the newsletter, to the written language leaves a lot out there quite literally unsaid, especially for folks who are interested in doing the language in person and not just reading and understanding Japanese text, which I will admit is a very fun thing to do. In the newsletter this month, I wrote about the word samidareshiki, which creates some extremely interesting distinctions between the spoken language and the written language. I'll say that word again. Samidareshiki. Samidareshiki. I'm willing to bet that unless you already know this word, you don't know what the kanji are used here. And the reason why I love having this podcast is because the podcast content is kind of the exact opposite of the situation in the newsletter, where I gave the kanji first before going over the pronunciation. Here, I'm starting with the pronunciation. With the kanji alone, I would say that almost every Japanese student would have some ability to decipher what the word means. However, with just the pronunciation, I think that's not the case. You would recognize the kanji and be able to extrapolate some kind of meaning from them, but samidareshiki, I think, is a little bit tough to decipher. I'll continue to not reveal the kanji for now, and I'll give you the meaning, which is kind of the opposite of how I did the newsletter, where I started with the kanji and worked my way through those to get the meaning, rather than so on the newsletter I kind of hide the meaning. So here the meaning is samidareshiki means intermittently, and it can be used with both positive and negative connotations. For example, if you end up sending out some kind of request to someone, and say, for example, an easy one for me because I'm involved in translation is to think about a translation request. And if you're making a translation request to a company or any kind of something with a delivery, right, that you could request in one delivery, or you could divide it up into multiple deliveries. And or the same thing with the request. You could send an entire request in one go, or you could divide the request up into multiple different sections. And if you happen to do that, divide it up into multiple sections and send it intermittently, you would say, samidareshiki ni moshiwake arimasen. Samidareshiki ni moshiwake arimasen. And this would mean, my apologies for sending this intermittently. And so you're apologizing here, so it seems to have a negative connotation. You can imagine that could be the case, right? If you're not giving them the whole project immediately, maybe that's something you would apologize for. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you are that company, for example, doing this work, whatever it happens to be, translation or creating something, anything, if you want to go ahead and get started right away rather than wait until the whole content is available, that might give you a head start, right? And that way you could get going, and the timeline for the completion of the project might be sooner than it would be otherwise. And if that's the case, if you're receiving a mail like that, or if you're trying to emphasize to someone that please go ahead and send us what you have now and send us the rest later, you could say, samidareshiki de kamaimasen. Samidareshiki de kamaimasen. Or you could say, samidareshiki de mondai nai desu. Samidareshiki de mondai nai desu. I feel like my pronunciation here with samidareshiki is not great. It's not an easy word to pronounce. I will say that. But I think you'll see visually it's easy to understand. So hopefully those few sentences, those 3 sentences that I just discussed, give you a good sense of how this word gets used. Right, you can use it essentially as an adverb in front of words like teishutsu, which would be submit. Samidareshiki ni teishutsu shimasu. I will be submitting this intermittently, something like that. Hopefully that gives you a basic sense. So given that meaning, do you have any sense of what kanji might be used to express this word? And this question goes out to people who don't already know this kanji, obviously. Well, believe it or not, this is actually 4 kanji. The last one is shiki from sotsuyo shiki, that kind of word, right? And then the first 2 are gogatsu, right? The month of May. Go, the number 5, gatsu, the kanji for month. The third kanji is ame, the character for rain, right? And the fourth is shiki, character used for a ceremony such as sotsuyo shiki, but also used in this case to mean style or method, which you would see in words like, I found a couple good examples that I linked in the newsletter, such as touch panel shiki, so touch panel style. So check out those links and how they're used there. So yeah, it gets used to mean ceremony often, but in this case, style. So a lot of students, when they would see this word, would probably try and pronounce it gogatsu ame shiki, but that's not in fact how it's pronounced. It is again samidareshiki. Samidareshiki. So how do we get samidareshiki, the pronunciation, from these characters, and why does May rain style mean intermittent in the first place? In the old calendar, gogatsu, May, was pronounced satsuki. This is the old name for May. So that gets us part of the way there. We can hear the sa from there, right? But there's no tsuki in samidare shiki, right? We can hear the sa. How do we get samidare? Midare. And the best I can tell from the sources I found, which are linked in the newsletter, midare is said to come from water, mizu, and tare, drop. And I assume mizu tare became midare at some point or something like that. Thus, you get samidare, which that's about as close as I can get to the etymology. And now, why does it mean intermittent? Intermittent, also another difficult word to pronounce, maybe fittingly. This, we actually have a simpler and more definite answer to. Samidare actually refers to the rainy season rains that are constantly stopping and starting, thus intermittent. So samidare, not the shiki, right? Samidare itself, gogatsu ame, on its own, is the rainy season. So this samidare shiki, whatever you're doing, this translation request, whatever you're doing intermittently, is like these rains that kind of are off and on, off and on, off and on, all during the rainy season. And now you might have the question, why May then? We know that rainy season's in June. And as I said at the start of the podcast, up until the last couple of days, the beginning part of May was excellent weather. So why does May, gogatsu, samidare, get associated with rainy season rains? And that is because rainy season used to be in May, and it did not shift due to climate change. The calendar itself shifted. Japan used to have a lunisolar calendar. I linked to the Wikipedia article on that in the newsletter. It's a lot more complicated than I'm able to explain personally, but it's interesting. They require, these lunisolar calendars require what is called an intercalary month. I think that's how you pronounce it, intercalary month, every 2 or 3 years, which is in effect a leap month, a 13th month to the calendar. I don't know how long Japan was on this calendar, but it was not really an issue to use this calendar until the country started interacting with the outside world that used a solar calendar. Ultimately, this resulted in a calendar shift. So December 3rd on the year Meiji 5, which was 1872, became January 1st, Meiji 6, which was 1873. This effectively shifted the entire calendar about a month. So December became January, November became December, October became November, September became October, August became September, July became August, June became July, and then finally May, Satsuki, became June. Thus, samidare, the rains of May, are now effectively the rains of June. So samidare is tsuyu, the rainy season, long rainy season that starts and stops very intermittently, and that we can look forward to next month. We already gotten a little bit of a taste of it in Osaka this weekend. Rained really heavily on Friday night, and then it was kind of gray all day yesterday. I think it rained a little bit overnight, and it's nice and warm and steamy today. So, and I think we got some more rain coming. So you see similar patterns to samidare in words like satsuki bare, which you might potentially read as gogatsu hare or something like that, which is just the old word for May again, and the word for clear skies, hare. And this refers to the brief moments of sunny weather during rainy season storms. Although, due to the calendar shift that we just talked about, it is often conflated to mean these pleasant post-spring sunny season in May before things get too terribly hot, the kind of nice weather that I just talked about. Samidare is a really useful word, especially in a business context, because people know exactly what it means. In that sense, it's a really dense word that's able to communicate a lot in a very small package. When people see it, visually, it has all this meaning contained in it, and it has very specific associations, right? these kind of patterns that we mentioned above, samidare-shiki ni moshiwake arimasen, things like that, or samidare-shiki ni teishitsu shite mo yoroshii deshou ka? Is it okay if I submit it intermittently, right? You can ask permission to do something like that with a phrase like that, or you could make it a little bit more polite by saying something like, ご迷惑でなければ、サメダレ式に納品させていただきたいんですが、よろしいでしょうか? One more time. ご迷惑でなければ, if it's not too much of a problem, サメダレ式に納品させていただきたいんですが, I'd like to deliver intermittently, but よろしいでしょうか? Is that okay? And then one more time. ご迷惑でなければ、サミダレ式に納品させていただきたいんですが、よろしいでしょうか? This is the kind of sentences that you want to load into either a flashcard software program or just a notebook somewhere. I use the Notes app on my iPhone and review it regularly. And these are the kind of sentences that I think will make you sound more professional in Japanese if you're able to use these fluently and without any trouble. But yeah, that's the newsletter for this month. One of my close friends from Chicago had mentioned it and wondered if I knew about it. So and I knew a little bit about it, but I didn't know too much about it. So it was fun to dig into that this month. And if you ever have any requests, please send them over my way, howtojapanese@gmail.com. I'm always looking for stuff to write about. I have stuff that I'm always working on, but glad to look into other phrases. So please do send them my way. If there's anything you're stumbling with, anything you need guidance with, glad to help with that. Also, I know that there are definitely still some spots available in the Japanese coaching through the U.S. JETA. That will be in June. So please look on the US JETA website, and I'll try and put a link to that in the newsletter as well for anyone interested in signing up for Japanese coaching. It's pretty low impact. We're just going to meet on a Zoom and talk about what challenges you're facing with your Japanese studies and see if we can't help find some solutions for that. So for the tourist Rex this month, I thought I would provide a little minor recommendation that I sort of hinted at in passing last month, or maybe the month before, I can't remember. But whenever I talked about Nishiki Market, which I think it probably was last month actually. Yeah, I did Osaka a month before last, Kyoto last month. When I talked about Kyoto, talked about Nishiki Market, mentioned that the side streets have some nice spots, and two of those are Ogawa Coffee and Dig the Line Bottle and Bar. I don't know much about Ogawa Coffee other than that it's a Kyoto-based coffee brand that has a big presence on grocery store shelves in Kansai. There are tons of their bags of coffee, all different kinds. They put out, in particular, these seasonal coffees, one for each season that just has the word for each season printed on the bags. And I don't think they have pre-prepared bottles and cans of coffee in kombini or anything like that. They do have a Honsha headquarter location somewhere else in the city, but their Sakaimachi Nishiki location is located just a few blocks off Nishiki Market, and it's a really nice place to get a coffee and a sandwich. I've been 2 or 3 times. The first was a Saturday evening, and it was pretty crowded. I had to wait to get a table. The second time was during Golden Week a year ago. So not this year, but 2024 Golden Week. And it was empty. Got there at lunchtime, right around like noon, between noon and 1. And no one was there. Your mileage may vary in terms of the crowds, but the location is nice, modern, clean coffee shop with a beautiful garden in the interior. You really can't go wrong. Food and coffee is delicious. Dig the Line Bottle and Bar is just a couple blocks north and 1 block west from Ogawa Coffee, so it's again very close to Nishiki Market, and it's a nice casual bar with an impressive selection of beer and wine. They seem to specialize in wild or natural fermentation, as best I could tell, which means that some of the beers, especially the bottled large format beers, are really expensive. But they do have some on tap too that are not break the bank. And they're super nice and tart and pleasant. And did have some non-sour beer there as well. I think I had an IPA and a natural wine when I was there. And these were like, 1,000 or 1,200 yen a pop. So not the cheapest thing, but I feel like those prices are becoming more and more normal for craft beer, craft wine, and things like that. The nicest place about the bar is that it felt like casual and unassuming. It didn't seem like you needed to book the spot to go there. It had an area where you could just kind of stand around, much like bars in the US. So you could just kind of go with friends and just have a quick one and then get out of there. So there are tables, though, if you do want to sit down. So it has a bit of a mingly atmosphere that maybe isn't everywhere in Japan. So give those two places a look. And then also I've got 2 quick Iro points at the bottom of the newsletter. Over on the blog, I've got another post about Murakami's memoir, Distant Drums. I finally have had time to kind of work on my reading that book, so I'm going back through a few chapters that I haven't covered just yet. I need to get a move on this project so that I can finish reading this book and read Murakami's other travel books. I have a feeling that this one was just a warm-up that he wrote for a travel memoir he wrote about going through Turkey and Greece, which I have a copy of, a really nice hardcover copy of, that you can get really affordably on Mercari because they just, for whatever reason, haven't retained value. And then finally, at the end of the newsletter, I shared a Blue Sky post of mine that has a pretty modest response, maybe not enough to call it viral, but a little bit more engagement than my usual posts. And it was just a reminder that you can get free public domain literature on Amazon Japan through Kindle. Unfortunately, this doesn't seem to be available on the U.S. Amazon. U.S. Amazon store. I took a look, but if you're able to get a Japanese account up and running on Amazon.co.jp, and one thing I do recommend is that you use a separate email address for your Amazon Japan account so that you don't confuse the two, because that can cause some issues. But on the Amazon Japan store, you can find most public domain literature for free. I added a Edogawa Rampo, a detective story that I'm going to try and read at some point. And you don't have to use Amazon for this, actually. So if you're not in the Amazon universe or like to avoid it, you can get it for free on Aozora apps. Aozora Bunko, you might be aware if you are a longtime listener and reader, it's a repository of public domain literature that is posted by volunteers, available on the web. And I use it basically for all the content in the Japanese reading group that I run through US Jeddah. Also open to any readers and listeners. I had my very first newsletter reader join the Japanese reading group this month, which is excellent. I really enjoyed that, and I hope more of you can make it. But Aozora, run by volunteers, posts new content very regularly. All the big old school big names are there, like Souseki and others. And there are a number of different apps on the App Store that can help you download it and access these readings. I'd be careful which one you pick. It does feel like some of them seem to have in-app purchases for different features to unlock different features. I can't vouch for any of those. I use a free one called iDokusho. That's the letter I, lowercase I, like iPhone I, and then dokusho is the word for reading in Japanese. And it seems to be relatively useful if you want a good alternative and don't want to support Amazon. So yeah, give those a look. Go read Kokoro. Go read Natsume Soseki's Yume Juya. Go read Edogawa Rampo's stories, detective stories, or Ningen Isu. Go read Dazai Osamu and all the other good writers out there. Thanks again for listening this month. Thanks again for reading, and hope you all are starting to keep cool as we move into the summer months. And I'll see you in June.